Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to the glittering courts or the dusty battlefields, but into the smoky, boisterous, and undeniably vibrant heart of medieval life, the tavern. Forget everything you think you know about pubs and bars. The medieval tavern was a world unto itself, a sensory overload, a social crucible, and often the only place where the rigid hierarchies of the age could momentarily blur. So, before you get too comfortable in your modern, clean surroundings, take a moment to imagine the smells, the sounds, the sheer press of humanity in a forgotten corner of a 14th century town. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into the past, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means the world and helps me bring more of these hidden histories to life. Also, I'm always curious where our journey takes us. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's truly amazing to see how far these stories travel across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe light a non-toxic candle if you dare, and let's surrender to the sounds of a distant age. Imagine approaching a medieval tavern after a long day of travel, or perhaps after hours toiling in the fields, or navigating the treacherous politics of the marketplace. The first thing that would hit you, even before you crossed the threshold, would be the smell. Not necessarily pleasant by modern standards, but distinct and pervasive. A heavy mixture of stale ale, wood smoke from the hearth, unwashed bodies, and the lingering scent of cooked meats and boiling stews. The cacophony of sound would follow, a roaring chorus of voices, laughter, the clatter of wooden tankards, perhaps the off-key strumming of a lute or the raucous bellows of a drinking song. This wasn't a place for quiet contemplation. It was a sensory assault, designed to awaken your weary senses and pull you into its orbit. The exterior of the tavern itself would likely be unassuming, often just another timber-framed building nestled amongst houses and shops. A simple sign, perhaps a bush or a wooden board depicting a bunch of grapes or a tankard, would announce its presence. Inside, however, was where the magic, and sometimes the mayhem, happened. The main room, the common room, was the heart of the establishment. It was typically a large, open space, dimly lit by flickering candles, sputtering oil lamps, and the glow of a central hearth. The walls, often plastered or simply bare timber, might be stained with smoke and years of spilled beverages. The floor would be packed earth, sometimes strewn with fresh straw to absorb spills and provide a modicum of warmth. But more often than not, it would be a sticky, uneven expanse bearing the marks of countless boots and overturned tankards. Seating was rudimentary. Rough-hewn wooden benches and tables, often communal, forcing strangers into close proximity. There was no concept of personal space as we understand it today. You would rub shoulders with merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, peasants, and perhaps even the occasional rogue scholar or disgraced noble. This enforced intimacy was part of the tavern's appeal. It fostered a sense of camaraderie, however fleeting, among diverse segments of society. Privacy was non-existent, and every conversation, every transaction, every argument was public spectacle. The air itself was a character in the medieval tavern narrative. Thick with smoke from the cooking fire and the pipes of patrons, it would cling to your clothes and hair. Ventilation was poor, if it existed at all beyond an open door or a few small, unglazed windows. This smoky haze, however, also served a purpose, softening the harsh edges of reality, obscuring the grimmer details of the room, and perhaps adding to the intoxicating atmosphere. The warmth radiating from the hearth was a welcome comfort, especially during the long, cold medieval winters, making the tavern a literal beacon of warmth and light in an often dark and cold world. Beyond the main common room, a medieval tavern might have a small kitchen area, often little more than a fire pit and a few cooking utensils, where simple, hearty fare like bread, cheese, pottage, a thick stew, and roasted meats would be prepared. There might also be a small bar area, or simply a counter where the tavern keeper or his staff would dispense ale directly from barrels. Upstairs, or in an adjoining section, some taverns offered rudimentary lodging, usually just a communal sleeping area with straw mattresses, catering to travelers who needed a place to rest their heads. These sleeping quarters, much like the common room, would offer little in the way of comfort or privacy. The tavern keeper was a central figure, often a man or woman of some standing in the community, responsible not only for serving drinks and food but also for maintaining a semblance of order, mediating disputes, and providing a safe, if rowdy, haven for travelers and locals alike. Their reputation was key. A well-run tavern with good ale and a relatively peaceful atmosphere would attract more patrons. Conversely, a tavern known for constant brawls or watered-down drinks would quickly lose its clientele. They were often a source of local information, a hub for news and gossip, and sometimes even a money lender or a point of contact for less reputable dealings. So, as you step into this imagined medieval tavern, try to shed your modern expectations. Embrace the noise, the smells, the crowded intimacy. This wasn't just a place to quench a thirst. It was a living, breathing entity, a social institution, a brief escape from the harsh realities of medieval life, and a vital pulse point of the community. It was a place where stories were born, secrets were whispered, and the human spirit, in all its messy glory, truly came alive. The experience was immersive, visceral, and unforgettable, a true window into a bygone era. Having established the foundational atmosphere of the medieval tavern, the smells, the sounds, the palpable human energy, it's time to delve deeper into the very lifeblood of these establishments, the people who filled them. So, who exactly were the patrons of a medieval tavern? The beauty, and indeed the fascinating complexity, of these spaces lies in their incredible diversity. Unlike many other facets of medieval society, which were rigidly structured by class, guild, or religious order, the tavern, in its essence, was a melting pot. It was a place where, if only for a few hours, the lines of social distinction could blur, or at least become less starkly defined, under the influence of ale and shared humanity. At the most fundamental level, you'd find the common folk. Peasants, who constituted the vast majority of the population, would seek respite from the arduous demands of agricultural life. After a day spent tilling fields, tending livestock, or harvesting crops, the tavern offered a much-needed sanctuary. It was a place to unwind, to share a pint with neighbors, to grumble about the local lord, or to celebrate a good harvest. For them, the tavern was more than just a place to drink. It was a communal living room, an extension of their often cramped and cold homes. They came for the warmth of the fire, the company of others, and the simple pleasure of an affordable, often more palatable, drink than their own water source. Beyond the peasantry, the medieval town itself contributed a vibrant mix. Apprentices, journeymen, and master craftsmen from various guilds would gather after a day in their workshops. A carpenter might discuss the quality of timber with a fellow mason, while a weaver might lament the price of wool to a dyer. These gatherings could be informal business meetings, opportunities for networking, or simply social occasions to blow off steam. Soldiers, both local watchmen and those passing through on campaign, were also regular fixtures, often distinguishable by their hardened demeanor and the clatter of their arms. They brought with them tales of distant lands, news from the front, and sometimes a volatile edge that could quickly turn convivial chatter into a drunken brawl. Merchants, from the humble peddler to the more prosperous trader, were essential to the tavern's ecosystem. For them, it was not just a place to eat and drink but a crucial information exchange. News of market prices, political unrest, new trade routes, and even potential business partners could be gleaned over a tankard of ale. They might use the tavern as an informal office, striking deals, settling accounts, or showcasing small wares. Pilgrims, identifiable by their distinctive clothing and badges, would stop at taverns along their routes, seeking lodging, sustenance, and the company of fellow travelers. They often brought with them stories from far-off shrines and a unique perspective on the world beyond the local village. Even members of the clergy, despite their vows, were not strangers to the tavern. Friars, in particular, who often relied on alms and the generosity of the populace, could be found seeking warmth and sustenance. While excessive drunkenness was frowned upon, a moderate presence was not uncommon, and taverns provided a convenient place to interact with parishioners, collect news, and perhaps even offer spiritual guidance. The presence of such diverse groups meant that the tavern was a dynamic social microcosm, reflecting the complex tapestry of medieval life. But what about the truly powerful? Did the shimmering robes of royalty ever grace the common floors of a medieval tavern? This is where history offers tantalizing, if rare, glimpses. It was certainly not common practice for a reigning king or queen to stroll into a public alehouse to quaff a pint with their subjects. Royal dignity and the strictures of court protocol typically precluded such informal interactions. Monarchs had their own extensive retinues, private kitchens, and often private cellars and dining halls within their castles and palaces. When traveling, they would stay in other noble estates or specially prepared lodgings, always surrounded by guards and courtiers. However, the allure of the common touch, or simply the desire for a moment of anonymity, could sometimes prove irresistible. Stories and chronicles occasionally recount instances of monarchs, or high-ranking nobles, visiting taverns in disguise. These incognito excursions were often undertaken out of curiosity, a desire to gauge the true mood of the populace, to gather intelligence, or simply to escape the stifling formality and constant scrutiny of court life. Imagine a king, cloaked and hooded, perhaps accompanied by a single trusted aide, sitting in a dimly lit corner, listening intently to the unfiltered conversations of his people. The commoners, oblivious to the royal presence in their midst, would speak freely of their grievances, their hopes, their opinions of the kingdom's rulers. For a monarch, such an experience could be invaluable, providing a stark contrast to the carefully curated information presented by their advisors. There are legends, for instance, of King Henry VIII of England, known for his love of merrymaking, occasionally venturing out of his palaces to experience the common life, though details are scarce and often exaggerated. More concrete accounts might exist for lesser-known rulers or those with a particularly adventurous spirit. Such visits would have been highly risky, both for the monarch's safety and for the preservation of their mystique. If discovered, the scene could have descended into chaos, reverence, or even rebellion. For the tavern keeper, the revelation of a royal guest would have been a moment of utter astonishment, and perhaps terror. To suddenly realize one had been serving the crown without proper deference. More frequently, royalty would interact with taverns indirectly. Their servants or purveyors would be sent to trusted local taverns to procure the finest Alesh, wines, and perhaps even specific culinary delights for the royal table. Royal decrees regarding brewing standards or the regulation of ale prices would directly impact tavern operations, illustrating the crown's subtle but omnipresent influence even in these seemingly humble establishments. So, although kings and queens did not usually become regulars, the idea of their secret visits adds a touch of romantic intrigue to the medieval tavern. It underscores the tavern's unique position as a space that, however briefly, could transcend the rigid social barriers of the age, drawing in everyone from the lowest peasant to, perhaps, the highest sovereign, all seeking something that only a bustling, boisterous, and sometimes dangerous medieval tavern could provide. Now, let's peel back another layer of the medieval tavern experience and confront a reality that would send shivers down the spine of any modern patron: the utter lack of sanitation and hygiene. While we've painted a picture of communal warmth and social vibrancy, it's crucial to understand that this came at a significant cost to what we now consider basic standards of cleanliness and public health. To truly immerse ourselves, we must acknowledge the pervasive smells, the visible grime, and the underlying threat of disease that lurked in every corner of these lively establishments. Forget your hand sanitizer and sparkling clean glasses. In a medieval tavern, clean was often a relative term, if it was used at all. For starters, let's consider the very fabric of the building itself. As mentioned, floors were typically packed earth or rough, uneven timber. These were not regularly scrubbed or disinfected. Spills of ale, wine, and food were commonplace, soaking into the earth or seeping into the cracks of the wood. While fresh straw might occasionally be strewn to absorb the worst of the mess and provide a thin layer of warmth, it was not changed frequently. This meant that the floor became a cumulative repository of filth. Spilled drinks, dropped food scraps, mud tracked in from the streets, and whatever else might have fallen or been carelessly discarded. This organic refuse was a breeding ground for insects and rodents, making the tavern a bustling ecosystem not just of humans, but of flies, fleas, and rats, all of whom were unwelcome but unavoidable cohabitants. Personal hygiene was, by modern standards, rudimentary at best for the vast majority of the population. Daily bathing was a luxury, if it happened at all, and washing clothes was an infrequent chore. This meant that patrons often brought the accumulated dirt, sweat, and smells of their daily lives directly into the tavern. The air, already thick with wood smoke from the hearth, would be laden with the combined odors of unwashed bodies, stale breath, and alcohol. Imagine the close quarters, the body heat, and the sheer number of people packed into a relatively small, poorly ventilated space. The resulting aroma would have been powerful, to say the least, and utterly alien to our contemporary sensibilities. Water, the fundamental element of hygiene, was a significant challenge. Medieval towns often lacked reliable, clean water sources. Wells could be contaminated, and rivers often served as both drinking water sources and sewers. This made drinking plain water a risky endeavor, contributing to the popularity of ale and wine, which, having undergone fermentation, were generally safer to consume. But even the water used for washing dishes or hands, if indeed hands were washed before handling food or drink, would have been of questionable quality, further perpetuating cycles of contamination. Serving vessels themselves posed another challenge. Wooden tankards and earthenware mugs were common. While they might be rinsed between uses, thorough washing with soap and hot, clean water was simply not the norm. Shared tankards were also common, allowing diseases to pass easily from one person to another. Food preparation areas, often adjacent to the main common room, would also fall short of modern health codes. Open fires were used for cooking, and smoke filled the kitchen area. Food might be left uncovered, exposed to flies and dust. Refrigeration was non-existent, meaning food, especially meat, had to be consumed quickly or preserved using salt, drying, or smoking, which could alter its taste and nutritional value. The risk of food poisoning from improperly stored or prepared food was a constant, unspoken threat. Latrine facilities, if they existed at all within the tavern, were typically primitive. An outhouse, a communal privy, or even just a designated spot in the backyard would have served. These would have been cesspits of stench and disease, contributing to the overall unsanitary conditions. The concept of hand-washing after using such facilities was not widely understood or practiced, further spreading pathogens. It's no wonder that medieval cities were frequently ravaged by outbreaks of disease, and taverns, as hubs of dense human interaction, would have been prime vectors for their transmission. The Black Death, for instance, spread rapidly through densely populated areas, and a busy tavern would have been an ideal environment for the flea-carrying rats and airborne transmission that facilitated its devastating sweep. Despite these grim realities, it's important to understand that for medieval people, this was simply their reality. They didn't have the scientific understanding of germ theory that we possess. What we perceive as utterly repugnant, they accepted as the normal state of affairs. They might have complained about the stench or the flies, but they didn't connect these nuisances directly to the spread of illness in the way we do. The enduring popularity of taverns, despite these conditions, speaks volumes about their social importance and the inherent human need for community, warmth, and escapism that outweighed the discomfort and health risks. So, while the medieval tavern offered a lively escape, a place for revelry and news, it also offered a stark reminder of the age's harsh realities. It was a testament to human resilience and adaptability, a space where people gathered not despite the grime and the danger, but often because there were few other options for communal gathering and simple enjoyment. The sheer vitality of these places, even amidst their squalor, provides a unique and powerful insight into the daily lives of our medieval ancestors, forcing us to reconsider our own assumptions about comfort and cleanliness. Having explored the diverse clientele and the challenging sanitary conditions, we now turn to perhaps the most infamous aspect of the medieval tavern, its propensity for conflict and outright brawls. While taverns were vital social hubs, offering warmth, sustenance, and camaraderie, they were also volatile spaces where passions ran high, inhibitions ran low, and disputes could escalate with alarming speed. The image of a medieval tavern is almost incomplete without the crashing sound of wooden chairs, the guttural roar of angry men, and the swift glint of steel. Alcohol, as it has throughout history, played a central role in fueling these confrontations. Though medieval ale and wine generally had lower alcohol content than many modern spirits, they were consumed in copious amounts. For many, Drinking was not just for pleasure but also for necessity, as fermented beverages were often safer than contaminated water. This meant that patrons could drink continuously for hours, gradually accumulating the intoxicating effects. As the night wore on, vigilance would diminish, judgment would become impaired, and simmering resentments or petty disagreements could ignite into open conflict. The jovial atmosphere of one moment could morph into a terrifying melee in the next, often with little warning. The close quarters of the common room also contributed significantly to the likelihood of altercations. People were packed tightly together at communal tables, forcing constant physical contact. A jostled elbow, an accidental spill, or a bumped shoulder could easily be perceived as an insult in a world where personal honor was highly valued and quick to take offense. In an age without widespread literacy or formal media, verbal communication was paramount, and often unfiltered. A stray remark, a critical observation, or a boastful declaration could be misconstrued or intentionally provocative, setting the stage for a confrontation. Disputes could arise from an array of triggers. Gambling, a common pastime in taverns, was a frequent source of tension. Arguments over rigged dice, unpaid debts, or accusations of cheating could quickly turn violent. Political discussions, especially during periods of unrest or shifting loyalties, were another volatile topic. Medieval society was hierarchical and often fraught with local rivalries. A slight against a lord, a village, or even a particular guild could lead to an explosive response. Personal insults, often deeply rooted in honor and reputation, were also a direct pathway to a brawl. A man's reputation, his family's honor, or his skill in a trade could be defended with fists, daggers, or whatever was at hand. The tools of violence were readily available. Most men, particularly soldiers, travelers, and even many common citizens, carried knives or daggers for practical purposes, but these could quickly become deadly weapons in a fight. Broken tankards, sturdy wooden benches, and even hot coals from the hearth could be improvised into dangerous projectiles or bludgeons. The lack of effective law enforcement in many areas meant that disputes often had to be settled through brute force, with the tavern keeper or a few brave patrons acting as the only arbiters. The tavern keeper's role in these situations was precarious. They were expected to maintain a semblance of order, but direct intervention could be dangerous. A good tavern keeper was often physically robust, quick-witted, and possessed a shrewd understanding of human nature, knowing when to interject, when to call for help, and when to simply stand back and let the storm pass. Some taverns might even have had a bouncer, of sorts, a strong individual tasked with ejecting unruly patrons. However, if a brawl truly erupted, it could quickly overwhelm even the most capable staff, leading to significant damage to the premises and serious injury, or even death, to those involved. These brawls, though dangerous, were also an undeniable part of the tavern's character and reputation. A tavern known for its lively, even violent, atmosphere might attract a certain type of clientele, soldiers, ruffians, or those seeking a thrill. Conversely, a more peaceful establishment might appeal to merchants and more respectable citizens. Regardless, the threat of violence was an ever-present undercurrent, adding a layer of unpredictable excitement and danger to the otherwise routine act of drinking and socializing. They were a testament to the raw, untamed spirit of medieval life, where justice was often swift and personal, and where grievances could be aired and settled, however crudely, in the public arena of the alehouse. The impact of these brawls extended beyond the immediate participants. They could lead to fines, imprisonment, or even more severe punishments if a death occurred. They also contributed to the overall perception of taverns as places of moral laxity and potential vice, often drawing the ire of religious authorities and local magistrates. Yet, despite these risks and condemnations, their popularity endured, underscoring the deep human need for social connection, escape, and perhaps a touch of unrestrained revelry that only a medieval tavern, with all its chaotic charm and underlying danger, could truly provide. The crashes, the shouts, and the lingering tension of a recent fight were as much a part of the medieval tavern symphony as the clinking of tankards and the strumming of a lute, painting a vivid picture of a world both familiar and profoundly alien. Having navigated the boisterous crowds, endured the questionable hygiene, and dodged the occasional brawl, a medieval tavern patron's primary focus would inevitably turn to sustenance. While the term tavern immediately conjures images of frothing tankards of ale, these establishments were far more than mere drinking dens. They were vital points of nourishment, providing essential calories and, sometimes, even a fleeting moment of culinary comfort in a world where food scarcity was a constant threat for many. So let's pull up a stool by the smoky hearth and delve into the unpretentious, yet utterly fundamental, menu of the medieval tavern. The undisputed king of the medieval tavern menu was, of course, ale. Water, as we've discussed, was often unsafe, making ale the daily beverage of choice for virtually everyone, from infants to the elderly. It was a caloric staple, often providing more immediate energy than sparse food. Medieval ale was not the highly refined, hopped brew we know today. It was typically unhopped or lightly hopped, brewed from malted barley, and fermented quickly, resulting in a thick, cloudy, and relatively low-alcohol beverage, often referred to as small beer, or table beer. This lower alcohol content, ranging from 1% to 3 to 4%, meant it could be consumed in large quantities without immediate incapacitation, though sustained drinking certainly led to intoxication. Higher alcohol, strong ale, was also available for those seeking a quicker path to merriment, or oblivion. Taverns usually brewed their own ale on site, or purchased it from local brewers. The quality could vary wildly from one establishment to another, influenced by the brewer's skill, the quality of the grain, and the cleanliness, or lack thereof, of the brewing equipment. A tavern renowned for its good, consistent ale would attract a loyal clientele. Prices were generally regulated, making ale accessible even to the poorest peasants, though a full day's wages might only buy a few gallons. The sound of ale being drawn from a barrel, the rich, earthy smell of malt, and the satisfying glug as it filled a wooden tankard were sensory hallmarks of any tavern. Wine was also available, though generally less common and more expensive than ale, making it the preferred drink of the wealthier patrons or for special occasions. In England, much of the wine was imported from France, particularly Bordeaux, adding to its cost and prestige. In wine-producing regions of the continent, wine would be as ubiquitous as ale, if not more so. Like ale, medieval wine was often unrefined, prone to spoiling, and might be served young or even mulled with spices to mask imperfections or served warmed in colder months. Beyond beverages, medieval taverns provided simple, hearty fare. This was not haute cuisine. It was sustenance designed to fill bellies and provide energy. The most fundamental offering was bread. It was the cornerstone of the medieval diet, and taverns would serve generous loaves or trenchers, thick slices of stale bread used as plates, which would then be eaten or given to the poor/dogs. Often, this bread would be made from coarser grains like barley or rye, reflecting the common diet. Pottage or potage was another staple. This was a thick, savory stew, typically made from whatever vegetables were available: cabbages, onions, carrots, peas, beans, grains, oats, barley, and sometimes a small amount of meat or bone for flavor. It was a communal dish, often simmering for hours over the tavern's main hearth, constantly topped up, making it a warm, inexpensive, and relatively nutritious option for patrons. The smell of simmering pottage would have been a constant backdrop to the tavern's atmosphere. Cooked meats, though more expensive, were also available, especially in more prosperous taverns or those frequented by travelers with deeper pockets. This might include roasted chicken, goose, rabbit, or cuts of beef or pork. These would often be roasted on a spit over the open fire in the common room, providing a tempting aroma and a visual spectacle. For those who could afford it, a freshly roasted joint of meat, served with bread and perhaps some simple greens, would have been a welcome luxury. Sausages were also common, being a practical way to preserve and serve meat. Cheese was a ubiquitous accompaniment, providing protein and flavor. It would be served in various forms, from fresh curds to aged, hard cheeses. Eggs, when available, might be boiled or fried. Dried fish, especially in coastal or riverine regions, was another common protein source. These were simple, often robust flavors, designed for immediate consumption and practical sustenance rather than gastronomic delight. The concept of a menu, as we understand it, was largely non-existent. Patrons would simply ask what was available, and the tavern keeper would list the daily offerings, often consisting of whatever pottage was bubbling, what bread had been baked, and what meats had been cooked or preserved. The focus was on availability and practicality. Payment for food and drink would typically be in small coins, or sometimes through barter, especially in rural areas. The tavern keeper would have a system for tracking tabs for local regulars, adding to the informal community banking system that often existed in these establishments. Ultimately, the food and drink in a medieval tavern was unpretentious, designed to meet the immediate needs of a weary traveler or a hungry local. It was the fuel that powered the conversations, the games, and even the occasional brawls. More than just sustenance, it was a central part of the tavern experience, blending practicality with the communal spirit of the place, making it a truly indispensable institution in the medieval world. Beyond its functions as a place of refreshment and refuge, the medieval taverns served another, arguably even more vital, purpose. It was the beating heart of local communication and news dissemination. In a world devoid of newspapers, radio, television, or the internet, information traveled primarily by word of mouth. And there was no better conduit for this intricate web of gossip, official pronouncements, and far-flung rumors than the bustling common room of a tavern. It was here that isolated communities connected with the wider world, and where individuals pieced together the fragments of their understanding about events both local and distant. Imagine the typical medieval setting. Most of the population was illiterate. Official decrees, when they came, might be read aloud by a town crier, but the nuances and immediate implications were often discussed and debated within the tavern's walls. Travelers, merchants, and soldiers, constantly moving between towns and regions, were the primary carriers of news. They were the medieval equivalent of foreign correspondents, delivering tidings from distant lands, reports of battles fought, treaties signed, or even just the latest fashions or scandals from the royal court. As such, these individuals, upon entering a tavern, would instantly become magnets for curious locals, eager to hear what news stories they carried. The tavern, therefore, became a powerful informal news agency. A merchant arriving from a distant market town might bring news of fluctuating grain prices, affecting every farmer and baker in the area. A returning soldier could recount gruesome details of a skirmish or whisper about troop movements, creating anxiety or excitement among the populace. A pilgrim returning from a holy site might share tales of miraculous cures or notorious bandits encountered on the road, adding to the spiritual and practical knowledge of the community. This direct, personal exchange of information was invaluable, offering a richer, more immediate context than any official proclamation could provide. Gossip was, of course, the lifeblood of tavern communication. From the mundane to the scandalous, every detail of local life was fair game for discussion. Who was courting whom? Whose cow had gone missing? Which neighbor was hoarding resources during a harsh winter? These were the local headlines. Taverns were perfect incubators for rumor. A whispered speculation in one corner could quickly become a widely accepted fact by the time it reached the other side of the room, often embellished and distorted along the way. While not always accurate, this constant flow of informal information knitted communities together, fostering a shared sense of identity and common concern. The tavern keeper himself was often a central figure in this communication network. As someone who interacted with a wide array of people daily, he was privy to a vast amount of information. He knew who was coming and going, who was meeting whom, and what news was circulating. Often, he acted as an informal postmaster, holding messages for travelers or knowing where to find someone. His establishment might even be the designated meeting point for local officials or merchants to conduct business, further cementing its role as a nexus of information. Patrons might specifically visit a certain tavern not just for its ale, but for the tavern keeper's reputation as a reliable source of local intelligence. For those planning journeys, the tavern served as an essential resource for intelligence gathering. Before embarking on a long trip, a traveler might spend an evening in a tavern, listening for news of bandit activity on certain roads, the condition of bridges, or potential lodging options along their route. Such information, garnered from other travelers, could be life-saving. Similarly, for someone looking to buy or sell goods, the tavern was the place to discover who had what to offer, who was looking to buy, and what the prevailing prices were, often allowing for informal negotiations to begin. Beyond practical news, the tavern was also a place for storytelling and entertainment. Bardic tales, often featuring local heroes, mythical creatures, or historical events, would be shared and refined here. These stories, whether sung or spoken, served to preserve local history, entertain the masses, and transmit cultural values. The oral tradition flourished in taverns, ensuring that narratives, both factual and fictional, continued to be passed down through generations. In essence, the medieval tavern functioned as a primitive, yet remarkably effective, form of social media. It was a place where information was crowdsourced, verified, or, more often, sensationalized, and propagated through direct human interaction. It fostered connections, built community bonds, and provided a collective understanding of the world, however limited or distorted that understanding might have been. Without these bustling, chaotic hubs of communication, medieval society would have been far more fragmented, isolated, and less informed. The tavern was truly the medieval town's unofficial parliament, newspaper, and social network all rolled into one smoky, ill-scented package. Beyond the clinking of tankards and the murmur of conversation, medieval taverns were vibrant arenas for entertainment, and chief among these diversions was the pervasive allure of gambling. In an age where public spectacles were limited and domestic life could be harsh, the tavern offered a potent mix of escapism and excitement. It was a place where fortunes, however small, could be made or lost in a single throw of the dice, and where the thrill of competition added another layer to the already bustling atmosphere. The most common form of gambling was undoubtedly dice games. Simple, portable, and requiring little more than a pair of bone or wooden dice and a flat surface, these games were accessible to virtually everyone. Players would gather around a table, or even on the floor, betting coins, personal items, or even promises of future labor or favors. Games like Hazard, a precursor to modern craps, were popular, involving multiple rolls and various betting options. The sound of dice rattling in a leather cup and clattering onto a wooden table would have been a constant, rhythmic backdrop to the tavern's general din, punctuated by shouts of triumph or groans of despair. Gambling, however, was rarely a genteel pastime. It was often characterized by high stakes, intense emotions, and frequent accusations of cheating. Dice were easy to manipulate. Loaded dice, shaved edges, or sleight of hand were common tricks employed by unscrupulous players. Disputes over rigged games were a significant source of brawls, adding to the inherent dangers of the tavern environment. The tavern keeper might try to intervene to prevent outright violence, but often, the lure of easy money outweighed the risk of a bloody nose. Regular patrons would likely develop reputations for honesty or dishonesty, and knowing whom to trust or avoid was a valuable skill. Card games were another popular form of entertainment, though they became more widespread later in the medieval period as playing cards, introduced from the Islamic world, gained popularity. Early card games were often simpler than modern equivalents, but still offered opportunities for strategic play and, of course, betting. Like dice, cards could be easily marked or manipulated, leading to similar accusations of foul play and heated arguments. Beyond direct gambling, taverns also hosted other forms of informal competition and entertainment. Board games such as tables, a precursor to backgammon, or chess, were enjoyed by more literate or strategic players, though often accompanied by side bets. These games offered intellectual challenge and a different kind of social interaction, allowing patrons to engage in quieter, more contemplative competition. The tavern's role as a social hub also lent itself to various non-gambling amusements. Storytelling was a timeless form of entertainment. Travelers and locals alike would share tales of adventure, local legends, news from afar, or humorous anecdotes. These oral traditions were crucial for preserving history, spreading folklore, and simply passing the time. A skilled storyteller could captivate an entire room, turning a regular evening into a memorable event. Music was another essential element of tavern life. While not every tavern could afford to hire professional musicians, many would have amateur performers. A patron might bring a lute, a pipe, or a drum, and spontaneously begin to play, encouraging others to join in with singing or dancing. Drinking songs, ballads, and folk tunes would fill the air, creating a lively and convivial atmosphere. Professional minstrels, jesters, or wandering entertainers might occasionally visit larger, more prosperous taverns, performing acrobatic feats, juggling, or singing epic tales for a few coins and a free meal. Their arrival would be a significant event, drawing crowds and adding a touch of exotic flair to the local scene. Drinking contests were also common, often spontaneous challenges among patrons to see who could consume the most ale or wine. While seemingly harmless, these could quickly become dangerous, leading to extreme intoxication and further exacerbating tensions. The spirit of competition, however, was deeply ingrained, and such contests added to the general boisterousness. Even simpler forms of entertainment, like engaging in lively debates or sharing jokes and riddles, were integral to the tavern experience. For many, the mere act of escaping the drudgery of daily life and engaging in conversation with a diverse group of people was entertainment enough. The tavern offered a release valve for social pressures, a place where one could momentarily shed their burdens and immerse themselves in the immediate pleasures of company, drink, and a little bit of risk. Ultimately, the gambling and entertainment within medieval taverns were not just diversions. They were integral components of their social fabric. They fostered interaction, provided excitement, and often served as a backdrop for the complex interplay of human emotions, hope and despair, triumph and anger, camaraderie and conflict. These activities transformed the tavern from a simple drinking spot into a dynamic, unpredictable, and endlessly fascinating stage for the unfolding drama of medieval life. Beyond the clatter of dice and the roar of arguments, the medieval tavern was also a stage, a rough-hewn, smoke-filled arena where the arts, in their simplest forms, flourished. Music, storytelling, and even impromptu performances were integral to the tavern experience, providing solace, entertainment, and a vital sense of communal joy in a world often defined by hardship. These weren't just background elements. They were central to the tavern's appeal, drawing patrons in and keeping them lingering long into the night. Music was perhaps the most universal form of entertainment. While not every tavern could afford to employ a resident musician, the very nature of these social spaces encouraged spontaneous musical expression. A patron might bring their own instrument, a simple lute or fiddle, a pipe or flute, or even a small drum. The moment someone began to play, others would often join in with singing, clapping, or even dancing. The tunes would typically be folk songs, ballads recounting local legends or tales of love and loss, or rousing drinking songs designed to be sung in unison, growing louder and more boisterous with every tankard consumed. The acoustics of a crowded, timber-framed room, though imperfect, would amplify the communal singing, creating a powerful, unifying sound that transcended individual differences and brought strangers together. Professional musicians, known as minstrels or jongleur, were also common figures on the medieval road, often making their living by performing in taverns, at fairs, and in noble courts. These itinerant entertainers possessed a wider repertoire, capable of playing more complex melodies, juggling, performing acrobatic feats, or even training animals for tricks. Their arrival in a local tavern would be a significant event, drawing crowds and promising an evening of elevated amusement. They would perform for tips, often coins thrown into a hat or cap, and the offer of free food and drink. A skilled jongleur, with their captivating tales and dexterous performances, could turn a quiet evening into a memorable spectacle, earning the tavern a reputation for lively entertainment. Storytelling was another fundamental form of entertainment, deeply embedded in the oral culture of the Middle Ages. In a largely illiterate society, stories were the primary means of transmitting knowledge, history, morality, and entertainment. The tavern, with its captive audience, was the perfect venue. Seasoned travelers, returning soldiers, or eloquent locals would share tales of their adventures, recite epic poems, or spin humorous anecdotes. These stories could range from fantastical tales of knights and dragons to realistic accounts of bandit encounters on lonely roads, or even gossipy narratives about local personalities. A good storyteller possessed charisma and a powerful voice, capable of transporting listeners beyond the smoky confines of the tavern to distant lands or thrilling battles. This communal act of listening fostered a shared experience, binding patrons through narrative. Bards, particularly in Celtic cultures, were revered figures, and while more common in noble halls, their influence permeated even the humbler tavern. Their intricate narratives and melodic recitations were a form of living history, reminding people of their heritage and inspiring them with tales of heroism. Even if not a full bard, anyone with a good memory and a captivating delivery could hold court in a tavern, sharing tales for the price of a pint. Beyond music and storytelling, other forms of performance might sporadically appear. Jesters, though primarily employed by nobility, might occasionally find their way to a public tavern during their travels, offering sharp wit, riddles, and satirical observations. Their humor, often cutting and irreverent, provided a crucial outlet for social commentary. Puppet shows or simple tableaux vivants, living pictures, might also be set up, particularly in larger taverns or during special festivals, providing visual storytelling for a captivated audience. The interactive nature of tavern entertainment was key. It wasn't just about passive viewing, it was about participation. Patrons would sing along, clap, shout encouragement, or heckle performers. This sense of collective involvement transformed the tavern into a space of active community engagement, fostering a sense of shared merriment. Even simple games like riddles or wordplay could turn into communal activities, sparking friendly competition and laughter. Furthermore, these entertainment forms served more than just amusement. They were crucial for social cohesion. Shared laughter over a jester's joke, collective singing of a familiar ballad, or the shared suspense of a traveler's tale. These moments built bonds between individuals who might otherwise have little in common. They provided an emotional release from the often grim realities of medieval life, offering a fleeting but profound sense of joy and connection. In essence, the medieval tavern was a microcosm of medieval popular culture. It was a place where artistry, however humble, was celebrated, where stories were kept alive, and where the human need for laughter, rhythm, and shared experience was abundantly met. It transformed a simple building into a vibrant, dynamic space, echoing with the sounds of human expression and enduring as a testament to the resilient spirit of medieval entertainment. Beyond the daily hustle and bustle of local life, the medieval taverns served another indispensable purpose. It was the weary traveler's oasis. In an age where roads were often little more than muddy tracks, bandits lurked in forests, and inns were sparse, the tavern offered a crucial sanctuary, a place to rest, reprovision, and prepare for the next leg of an often arduous journey. For pilgrims, merchants, soldiers, or simply those seeking to escape their immediate surroundings, the tavern was a beacon of civilization on an otherwise desolate landscape. The need for accommodation was paramount. Unlike modern hotels, medieval taverns rarely offered private, luxurious rooms. Instead, lodging was typically rudimentary and communal. Travelers would often find themselves sleeping in a shared dormitory space, sometimes with straw mattresses laid out on the floor, or perhaps a series of simple wooden bunks. Privacy was almost non-existent. You might be sleeping alongside a snoring merchant, a grumbling soldier, or a family of peasants, all sharing the same air and the same cramped quarters. The cacophony of the common room below, or the sounds of other restless sleepers, would have been your lullaby. Despite the lack of comfort, the mere provision of a roof over one's head and a relatively safe place to sleep was invaluable. Exposed to the elements, or worse, to the dangers of the open road, wild animals, highwaymen, or vengeful lords, any shelter was better than none. Taverns in larger towns or along major pilgrimage routes might offer slightly better accommodations, sometimes even individual curtained-off beds for those with more coin, but these were exceptions rather than the rule. A crucial service offered by many taverns, especially those on trade routes, was the provision of stabling for horses and other pack animals. For travelers, their animals were their lifeline, essential for transport and carrying goods. A tavern with a well-maintained stable and a reliable stable boy was highly prized. The stable would offer fodder, water, and a secure place to rest the animals overnight. The sound of hooves, the smell of hay and manure, and the occasional whinny would have been a familiar part of the tavern's periphery, signifying its broader role as a waypoint for journeys. The tavern also functioned as a logistical hub. Before continuing their journey, travelers could use the tavern to replenish their supplies. This meant not just filling their water skins or wine flasks, but also acquiring provisions like bread, cheese, dried meat, or oats for their horses. Some taverns might even offer rudimentary repair services for wagons or equipment, or connect travelers with local smiths or carpenters who could provide such aid. This made the tavern an essential stop for preparation, ensuring travelers were as ready as possible for the challenges ahead. Furthermore, the tavern served as a vital source of information for those on the move. As discussed in Part 6, the tavern was a communication nexus. For travelers, this meant gleaning critical intelligence about the roads ahead. They could learn about recent bandit activity in certain forests, discover which bridges were out, inquire about the reputation of the next town's lord, or find out about outbreaks of disease in distant regions. This intelligence, gathered from other travelers and local gossip, could dictate their route, their pace, and even save their lives. A traveler might spend an entire evening simply listening, gathering snippets of information that, when pieced together, formed a valuable map of the immediate future. The camaraderie among travelers was another significant aspect. Sharing a communal meal or a tankard of ale with fellow journeymen, pilgrims, or soldiers created a temporary bond. These were individuals who understood the hardships of the road, and sharing stories, tips, and even complaints fostered a sense of shared humanity. Such encounters could lead to temporary alliances for mutual protection on dangerous stretches of road, or even long-lasting friendships. For many, the tavern represented a temporary escape from the loneliness and peril of travel. It offered warmth, light, the comfort of human voices, and the promise of a hot meal. It was a place where the anxieties of the journey could be momentarily set aside, and where one could recharge both body and spirit before facing the unknown challenges of the road once more. The simple act of sitting by a roaring fire, with a full belly and a tankard in hand, would have been a profound luxury for those who had endured days or weeks of exposure and uncertainty. In essence, the medieval tavern was far more than just a place to drink. It was a crucial link in the chain of medieval travel. It served as a vital staging post, a provider of shelter and sustenance, a hub of vital information, and a temporary community for those navigating the vast and often treacherous landscape of the medieval world. Its presence underscored the very real difficulties of travel and the enduring human need for safety, comfort, and connection, even in the most rudimentary of settings. While the medieval tavern was undeniably a beacon of community, warmth, and revelry, it was also, by its very nature, a magnet for the less savory elements of society. In a world with rudimentary law enforcement and porous social structures, the anonymity and constant flow of people through a tavern made it an ideal breeding ground for petty crime, illicit dealings, and the hatching of more nefarious plots. The dim lighting, the ceaseless din, and the general state of intoxication often served as a perfect cover for activities that would never see the light of day, or rather, the harsh glare of public scrutiny. One of the most common forms of crime encountered in a medieval tavern was petty theft. Pickpockets, skilled at navigating crowded spaces, would target unwary travelers or drunken locals. A pouch containing a few coins, a valuable ring, or even a good cloak could easily disappear amidst the jostle and merriment. The loss, though small by modern standards, could be devastating for a medieval peasant or traveler, potentially leaving them stranded or destitute. Tavern keepers, while usually keen to prevent overt crime that might harm their reputation, often had little control over such subtle acts, which were often attributed to the general chaos of the establishment. Beyond simple theft, taverns were ripe for various forms of swindling and trickery. As we discussed in Part 7, gambling with dice or cards was ubiquitous, and with it came the prevalence of loaded dice, marked cards, or cunning sleight of hand. Professional cheats, known as coney catchers or sharpers, would frequent taverns, looking for naive victims to fleece. They might work in teams, one acting as a friendly, unsuspecting stranger, the other as the skilled manipulator. The atmosphere of trust and camaraderie, combined with alcohol-induced diminished judgment, made patrons easy targets for such schemes. The tavern also served as an unofficial marketplace for stolen goods. A thief who had purloined items from a market stall or a noble's estate would seek out a discreet corner in a tavern to find a buyer. The constant turnover of individuals, especially travelers and merchants who might be less inclined to ask questions, provided a perfect cover for such transactions. A valuable piece of fabric, a stolen jewel, or even a purloined horse could change hands for a fraction of its true value, facilitating the illicit trade that thrived in the shadows of medieval towns. Furthermore, taverns attracted individuals involved in more morally ambiguous, though not always outright criminal, activities. Prostitutes, often operating on the fringes of society, would frequent taverns to find clients. While some taverns might have been overtly brothels, many others simply tolerated the presence of loose women, recognizing that their presence could attract male clientele. This added another layer to the tavern's complex social dynamic, bringing with it issues of morality, disease transmission, and potential exploitation. For those involved in more serious criminal enterprises, the tavern offered a convenient, semi-private meeting place. Bandits and highwaymen might use taverns as safe havens to plan their next ambushes, gather intelligence on wealthy travelers, or simply lay low after a successful raid. Smugglers could use them to arrange clandestine deliveries or to connect with distributors for their contraband goods. The noise and general lack of strict scrutiny made it easier for conspirators to communicate without drawing undue attention. Whispers exchanged over a tankard of ale could initiate a plan that would affect lives far beyond the tavern's walls. The darker side of taverns was also linked to the activities of various social outcasts and vagrants. While some might be genuinely desperate, others lived by their wits, constantly seeking opportunities to exploit others. These individuals, often dispossessed or on the run, found a temporary refuge in the tavern's communal anonymity, blending in with the diverse crowd and potentially causing mischief. Law enforcement, as mentioned, was often ill-equipped to deal with the subtleties of tavern crime. A local constable might make occasional rounds, but their presence was usually more about deterring overt brawling than catching skilled pickpockets or uncovering illicit dealings. Justice, when it came, was often swift and brutal, but prevention was a much harder task in these bustling, fluid environments. The very atmosphere of debauchery and excess associated with taverns also meant that they were often viewed with suspicion by the authorities and the church. While tolerated as necessary evils, they were frequently cited as places where sins flourished: gluttony, drunkenness, lust, and avarice, all of which could easily spill over into outright criminal behavior. This perception, while often exaggerated, was rooted in the very real potential for lawlessness that existed within their walls. In essence, while the medieval tavern was a vital organ of community life, it was also a reflection of its society's underbelly. It was a place where the lines between legitimate business and illicit dealings could blur, where fleeting pleasures could lead to devastating losses, and where the safety of a convivial gathering could quickly give way to the cold reality of crime. This darker side, though unsettling, adds another layer of complexity to our understanding of these truly multifaceted institutions, reminding us that medieval life, even in its most social settings, was rarely without its dangers. As we've painted a picture of the medieval tavern, a male-dominated realm of ale, brawls, and boisterous camaraderie, it's crucial to challenge this simplified image and acknowledge the often pivotal role played by women. Far from being mere background figures, women were integral to the daily operation and social fabric of medieval taverns, whether as proprietors, workers, or customers. Their presence, however, was always viewed through the complex lens of medieval societal norms, which often judged women's public roles with suspicion, particularly in places associated with drinking and revelry. Perhaps the most significant role for women in medieval taverns was that of the alewife or brewster. In many medieval communities, brewing was primarily a woman's domain. It was a domestic task, a household chore performed to provide for the family, but it quickly evolved into a commercial enterprise. Many homes would brew ale for sale, and some women became professional brewers, setting up small, informal alehouses, often simply their own homes designated with a bush or a sign outside. These female brewers and tavern keepers were entrepreneurs, running businesses that were essential to their communities. They were responsible for sourcing ingredients, managing the brewing process, serving customers, handling money, and often maintaining order, or at least the semblance of it, in their establishments. This was a challenging and demanding profession, requiring shrewd business sense, resilience, and a strong personality. These alewives often inherited their businesses from their mothers or husbands, or established them to support their families, especially if they were widows or single women. They were often the backbone of the local economy, providing a vital commodity. Their success depended on the quality of their brew and their ability to manage a diverse clientele. They would have known every local, every gossip, and every potential troublemaker. Beyond the proprietress, women also worked as serving staff within larger taverns. These might be daughters of the tavern keeper, or women hired to assist with serving drinks, preparing food, and cleaning. Their roles were often physically demanding and involved constant interaction with a varied and sometimes unruly male clientele. While their labor was essential, their public presence in such establishments could often invite judgment and unwanted advances, highlighting the precariousness of women's positions in public life. As patrons, women frequented taverns for many of the same reasons as men: to socialize, to escape the drudgery of daily life, to gather news, or simply to enjoy a drink. While noble women rarely visited common taverns, women from the middle and lower classes, including wives, widows, and unmarried women, were regular visitors. They might come in small groups, with their husbands, or to conduct minor business. For some, particularly those without large families or strong community ties, the tavern offered a crucial social outlet, a place to connect and feel part of something larger. It's important to remember that homes in the Middle Ages were often small, cold, and poorly lit, making the warm, lively tavern an attractive alternative. However, the presence of women in taverns was frequently viewed with suspicion and often led to negative stereotypes. Taverns were often associated with moral looseness, and women who frequented them were easily labeled as loose or disreputable. This double standard meant that while men could indulge in drink and revelry with little social consequence, women faced significant damage to their reputation if they were seen too often, or behaving too freely, in such establishments. This societal pressure often confined respectable women to more discreet visits, or to specific hours. The presence of prostitutes further complicated the perception of women in taverns. While some taverns actively served as brothels, or had rooms dedicated to prostitution, in many others, prostitutes would simply ply their trade by mingling with patrons. This informal arrangement blurred the lines for many, making it difficult for outsiders to distinguish between a respectable female patron and a working woman, thus casting a shadow over all women present. This created an environment where women could be vulnerable to exploitation, harassment, and violence, particularly after consuming alcohol. Despite these challenges and societal judgments, medieval women continued to be a significant presence in taverns. Their economic necessity as brewers and tavern keepers, and their social need for community and recreation, often outweighed the risks to their reputation. They demonstrated remarkable resilience and agency in navigating these complex public spaces. Their stories, though often unwritten, are embedded in the very walls of these ancient establishments, testifying to their integral role in shaping the social and economic landscape of the medieval world. In summary, the medieval tavern was not solely a male domain. It was a contested, yet vital, space where women exercised agency, contributed economically, and sought social connection, all while navigating the often prejudiced societal norms that sought to limit their public presence. Their resilience in these bustling, often chaotic environments underscores their multifaceted contributions to medieval life. While the medieval tavern often appeared as a chaotic, self-regulating hub of activity, it was, in fact, subject to a surprising degree of scrutiny and control from various authorities. Local lords, town councils, guilds, and even the church all sought to regulate the tavern's operations, its products, and the behavior of its patrons. This constant oversight reflected a societal tension. Taverns were recognized as essential for social and economic life, yet they were also viewed with suspicion as hotbeds of potential vice, disorder, and even sedition. One of the primary forms of regulation involved licensing. Operating a tavern was not a free-for-all. It typically required permission from the local lord, the monarch, or the town council. This license, often granted annually, served multiple purposes. Financially, it was a source of revenue for the authority granting it, often through a fee or tax. Administratively, it allowed authorities to control the number of taverns, preventing an oversaturation that could lead to cutthroat competition or excessive public drunkenness. Furthermore, licensing provided a mechanism for control. An unruly or disreputable tavern could have its license revoked, effectively shutting down the business. The tavern keeper, therefore, had a vested interest in maintaining a certain level of order to protect their livelihood. Quality control of ale and wine was another significant area of regulation. Given that ale was a dietary staple and its quality directly impacted public health, authorities often took steps to ensure brewers maintained certain standards. Local officials, known as ale conners or tasters, would inspect taverns to ensure that the ale was of a satisfactory quality and that measures were honest. They might literally taste the ale to check for sourness or adulteration. Fines were levied for selling substandard ale or for short-changing customers. Similarly, the measurement of drinks was often standardized, with strict penalties for serving less than a full measure. This protected both the consumer and the reputation of the local brewing industry. The very existence of such rules highlights the widespread nature of brewing and its economic importance. Pricing was also subject to regulation. To prevent price gouging and ensure accessibility for the common folk, local authorities often set maximum prices for ale and wine. This was particularly crucial during times of scarcity or high demand. These assizes of ale and bread were fundamental to maintaining social order, as hunger and unaffordable provisions were common triggers for unrest. A tavern keeper who exceeded these prices risked heavy fines or other punishments. Beyond the product itself, authorities sought to regulate behavior within the tavern. Measures were often put in place to control gambling, limit excessive drunkenness, and prevent brawls. While completely eradicating these activities proved impossible, laws existed against public disturbances, fighting, and illegal gambling. Curfews might be imposed, requiring taverns to close their doors after certain hours. For example, some city ordinances might forbid dice games after a certain hour or prohibit serving ale to already heavily intoxicated individuals. However, the enforcement of these laws was often inconsistent, depending on the diligence of local officials and the sheer volume of patrons. The church also played a significant, albeit often moral, role in regulating taverns. While recognizing the tavern's necessity, the church frequently condemned excessive drinking, gambling, and prostitution that often occurred within their walls. Sermons would rail against the sins fostered in such places, and church courts might punish individuals for moral transgressions committed in taverns. This moral pressure, while not always legally binding, added another layer of social control, influencing public perception and sometimes prompting authorities to act. Guilds also held sway, especially craft guilds in towns. If a tavern keeper was a member of a guild, e.g., the Brewers' Guild or the Vintners' Guild, they would be subject to the guild's rules and standards, which could cover everything from quality of ingredients to apprenticeship regulations. Guilds aimed to protect their members' interests, maintain standards, and prevent unfair competition, thereby indirectly regulating the tavern trade. Ultimately, the regulation of medieval taverns was a complex, often imperfect system reflecting the era's blend of economic pragmatism, social control, and moral concern. Taverns were tolerated, even encouraged, for their social and economic utility, but they were also places that authorities watched carefully. The constant push and pull between the tavern's innate tendency towards revelry and the authorities' desire for order shaped these vital institutions, making them not just spaces of freedom, but also arenas where the boundaries of permissible behavior were constantly tested and enforced. To truly appreciate the medieval tavern, it's essential to understand its place within the broader tapestry of medieval society. While it was undeniably a central hub, it wasn't the only gathering place. Medieval life was rich with social institutions, each serving distinct purposes. By comparing the tavern to these other pillars, the church, the market, the guild hall, and even the private home, we can better grasp its singular importance and why, despite its often dubious reputation, it remained an indispensable part of daily life. The church was, without question, the most dominant institution of the Middle Ages, permeating every aspect of life from birth to death. It offered spiritual guidance, moral instruction, and a sense of community through shared faith and ritual. Services, feast days, and religious festivals brought people together, often in solemn reverence. The church building itself was usually the most imposing structure in any town or village, a symbol of spiritual power and a communal space for prayer and quiet reflection. In stark contrast, the tavern was a place of earthly delights, often loud, boisterous, and associated with sinful activities like excessive drinking, gambling, and revelry. While the church preached temperance and piety, the tavern celebrated indulgence and carnal pleasures. Yet they weren't entirely separate worlds. People would move from church to tavern, seeking spiritual nourishment on one hand and social solace on the other. The tavern often provided the secular counterpoint to the church's sacred space, a release valve for the pressures of medieval morality. The market was another crucial social and economic hub. It was the place where goods were bought and sold, where farmers met townspeople, and where the economic pulse of the community was most keenly felt. Markets were bustling, noisy, and vital, focusing on commerce and the exchange of goods. Like taverns, they were places of news and gossip, but their primary function was transactional. The tavern, while sometimes hosting informal business deals, prioritized social interaction and leisure. After a long day of haggling in the market, a visit to the tavern was often a natural next step, a place to count profits, commiserate over losses, or simply unwind from the intense commercial pressures. The market provided the necessities for life. The tavern provided the means to enjoy it. Guild halls were central to the lives of craftsmen and merchants within specific trades. Guilds provided mutual support, regulated quality, set prices, trained apprentices, and maintained social welfare for their members. Guild halls were places of formal meetings, banquets, and professional networking. They embodied order, professionalism, and exclusivity, fostering a strong sense of identity among members of a particular craft. The tavern, by contrast, was far more inclusive. While guild members certainly frequented taverns, the tavern was open to everyone, regardless of trade or social standing, within limits, of course. It was a melting pot where a baker could drink alongside a weaver, a soldier, or a traveling merchant, fostering a broader sense of community beyond professional affiliations. It was a space for informal collaboration and spontaneous interaction, quite different from the structured formality of the guild hall. Finally, we must consider the private home. For most medieval people, the home was the primary social unit, a place of family, domesticity, and the foundation of one's personal world. Homes were often small, crowded, and lacked the warmth, light, or communal buzz of a tavern. Heating was often limited to a central hearth, and privacy was almost non-existent. The tavern offered a vital escape from the confines and demands of domestic life. It was a place where one could meet friends, strangers, and engage in activities, like gambling, boisterous singing, or simply extended conversation, that might be difficult or unwelcome in the crowded home. For single individuals or those without strong family ties, the tavern could function as an extended living room, providing companionship and a sense of belonging that their personal dwelling might not offer. In essence, while medieval society had various social structures and gathering places, the tavern carved out a unique niche. It was the ultimate liminal space, less formal than the church or guild hall, less transactional than the market, and more expansive and open than the private home. It offered a crucial blend of relaxation, entertainment, communication, and social leveling that no other institution could fully provide. It was where the secular soul of the community truly came alive, a place of unvarnished human interaction, vital for both individual well-being and the collective spirit of the medieval town. Its enduring appeal lay precisely in its ability to offer something fundamentally different and equally necessary to the medieval populace. To fully grasp the medieval tavern's place in society, it's not enough to examine its physical realities or social functions. We must also consider how it was perceived and depicted in the art, literature, and popular culture of the era. These portrayals, often rich with caricature and moral commentary, reveal as much about medieval anxieties and values as they do about the taverns themselves, presenting a nuanced picture that ranges from jovial camaraderie to outright condemnation. One of the most famous literary depictions of medieval tavern life comes from Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, specifically in The Pardoner's Tale. While the tale itself is a moralistic condemnation of greed, its opening scene vividly sets the stage in a Flemish tavern. Chaucer describes young revellers indulging in riot, hazard, stews, and taverns, associating the tavern with gluttony, drunkenness, gambling, and prostitution. The characters drink, swear, and gamble, embodying the very vices the church preached against. This portrayal, while perhaps exaggerated for didactic purposes, reflects a common perception of taverns as places where moral boundaries were blurred and sinful behavior flourished. The image of the three rioters, drinking and plotting their ill-fated quest, perfectly encapsulates the tavern as a breeding ground for folly and disaster. Another significant literary source is Piers Plowman, by William Langland. This allegorical poem, critical of social and religious corruption, also features scenes in taverns, depicting them as places where common folk, and even some clergy, succumb to drink and idleness. Langland's descriptions are less romanticized than Chaucer's, often emphasizing the squalor, the excessive consumption, and the inevitable quarrels that arose from drunken revelry. These literary works, read, or more often, heard by medieval audiences, shaped popular opinion, cementing the tavern's image as a place of temptation and potential moral decay. In art, medieval taverns were frequently depicted in manuscripts, wall paintings, and later, in woodcuts. These illustrations often served a dual purpose: to show everyday life and to offer moral commentary. They frequently highlighted the excesses: patrons with flushed faces, overturned tankards, dice games, and brawling. Sometimes, the devil or allegorical figures of vice would be subtly, or not so subtly, included in the background, reinforcing the Church's message that such places were gateways to perdition. Scenes of drunkenness, gluttony, and lust were common themes, visually warning against the temptations found within tavern walls. However, not all artistic representations were purely negative. Some illustrations, particularly those in secular contexts or genre scenes, depicted taverns as lively, convivial places where people genuinely enjoyed themselves. These might show musicians playing, couples dancing, or friends engaged in hearty conversation, suggesting that for many, the tavern was indeed a place of joyful social interaction, not just moral downfall. These contrasting depictions underscore the complex reality. Taverns were simultaneously spaces of community and chaos, comfort and temptation. Popular songs and ballads also contributed significantly to the tavern's cultural image. Drinking songs, in particular, celebrated the joys of ale and wine, the camaraderie of fellow drinkers, and the temporary escape from life's hardships. These songs, sung loudly within the taverns themselves, created a self-reinforcing cultural narrative of the tavern as a place of uninhibited merriment. Folk tales and legends, often transmitted orally in taverns, further shaped their image, sometimes featuring clever tavern keepers, notorious patrons, or memorable incidents that occurred within their walls. The stereotypes surrounding taverns were pervasive. The drunken fool, the cheating gambler, the loose woman, and the brawling rogue were all stock characters frequently associated with these establishments. These archetypes served as shorthand in medieval narratives to convey immediate impressions about character and setting. The very mention of a tavern in a story would instantly conjure up a set of expectations for the audience, often leaning towards the boisterous and the morally ambiguous. Interestingly, even while condemning the moral failings, medieval society acknowledged the tavern's practical necessity. It was a place for food, drink, and shelter, particularly for travelers. This dual perception, morally suspect yet socially indispensable, is a recurring theme in how taverns were treated in popular culture. They were often portrayed as a necessary evil, a reflection of the human condition with all its flaws and desires. In conclusion, the portrayal of medieval taverns in literature, art, and popular culture offers a rich and often contradictory lens through which to view these institutions. From Chaucer's moralizing tales to the boisterous drinking songs, and from cautionary illustrations to scenes of genuine merriment, these depictions reveal that the tavern was a deeply ingrained and complex part of medieval life. It was a space that simultaneously fascinated and repelled, symbolizing both the communal spirit of the age and its ever-present temptations. These cultural reflections are invaluable for understanding how medieval people viewed themselves and their world, often through the smoky, ill-scented haze of the local tavern. While we've painted a broad strokes picture of the medieval tavern, it's crucial to acknowledge that the term tavern itself encompassed a wide spectrum of establishments. Just as modern pubs range from upscale gastropubs to humble local dives, medieval taverns varied significantly in their appearance, clientele, services, and reputation. Their character was often determined by their geographic location, whether nestled in a bustling city, a quiet rural village, or strategically positioned along a major road, and the specific needs of the patrons they aimed to serve. Understanding these distinctions enriches our appreciation of their multifaceted role. At one end of the spectrum were the rural taverns, often little more than a villager's home selling ale brewed on the premises. These were the simplest and most common form of alehouse, serving the local peasantry and perhaps the occasional traveler. Their clientele would be overwhelmingly local, familiar faces who knew each other's lives and gossip. The atmosphere would be less about boisterous revelry and more about quiet companionship after a hard day's work. Food offerings would be extremely basic, perhaps just bread and cheese, alongside the homebrewed ale. Sanitation would be rudimentary, probably even worse than in urban centers, and the entertainment might be limited to shared stories or the spontaneous singing of folk songs. These taverns were community centers in their purest form, providing a vital social outlet in isolated rural areas. In contrast, urban taverns in bustling towns and cities were far more diverse and complex. Here, the competition was fiercer, and establishments often specialized to attract different segments of the populace. Common public houses. These were the most numerous, akin to the general tavern we've largely discussed. They served a broad cross-section of the urban population, merchants, craftsmen, laborers, and transient visitors. They would be larger, noisier, and more varied in their offerings than their rural counterparts, with a wider selection of food and more consistent entertainment like dice games and occasional musicians. Gentlemen's, or merchants' taverns. These were higher-end establishments, catering to the wealthier classes. They might offer a cleaner, more private atmosphere, perhaps with separate rooms or booths, and a better quality of wine alongside ale. Their food would be more refined, potentially including roasted game and more elaborate dishes. They would be less prone to overt brawls, relying more on discreet service and a more refined clientele. Information exchange here might focus on trade routes, political maneuvers, and financial dealings. Taverns near markets or ports. These would be characterized by a constant flux of international visitors, sailors, foreign merchants, and long-distance traders. The atmosphere would be cosmopolitan, noisy, and potentially chaotic. Languages from across Europe might be heard, and the news exchange would be truly global. These taverns would also be prime locations for illicit trade and the darker elements we discussed in Part 10, as anonymity was easier to maintain. Taverns near cathedrals or pilgrimage sites. These would cater specifically to pilgrims, offering lodging and sustenance for those on religious journeys. Their character might be slightly more subdued, with a focus on practical needs rather than pure revelry, though pilgrims certainly partook in both. They might even display religious iconography or provide spaces for prayer. Then there were the roadside inns, or posting houses, strategically located along major travel routes, often a day's ride apart. These were larger establishments, designed specifically to cater to travelers. They would typically offer more extensive lodging facilities, including private rooms if available, and certainly stables for numerous horses. Their primary business was providing food, drink, and safe overnight stays for those on long journeys. The news exchanged here would be highly focused on travel conditions, dangers on the road, and the latest events from distant towns. These inns often had a transient clientele, with new faces arriving and departing daily. Finally, we must acknowledge the existence of outright, disreputable taverns, or dens of iniquity. These were often found in the poorest or most neglected parts of towns, or hidden away in alleys. They catered specifically to criminals, outlaws, and those engaged in illicit activities. Sanitation would be abysmal, brawls constant, and the risk of theft or violence extremely high. They were the dark underbelly of the tavern world, rarely frequented by honest citizens, yet a crucial part of the urban landscape for those who lived outside the law. The differences between these tavern types were not always clearly delineated, and some establishments might shift their character over time. However, this diversity highlights that the medieval tavern was not a monolithic institution. It was a dynamic, adaptable space, constantly molding itself to the specific needs and social norms of its immediate environment, and the specific types of patrons it sought to attract. This nuanced understanding allows us to appreciate the true complexity and indispensable nature of these medieval social hubs. While the medieval tavern was an undeniable cornerstone of daily life, a vibrant hub of community, commerce, and camaraderie, it was simultaneously viewed with profound suspicion and often outright condemnation by the most powerful moral authority of the age, the Church. This created a fascinating duality, where the tavern was both an indispensable social institution and a recurring symbol of vice, sin, and temptation in the eyes of religious leaders and moralists. Understanding this tension is crucial to fully appreciating the complex place taverns held in medieval society. The Church's primary concerns stemmed from the behaviors so frequently associated with taverns: drunkenness, gluttony, gambling, and prostitution. These were explicitly listed among the 7 deadly sins or considered grave moral failings. Sermons regularly denounced the evils of excessive drinking, warning of its capacity to corrupt the soul, lead to violence, and erode social order. Preachers would paint vivid pictures of sinners wasting their meager earnings on ale, neglecting their families, and falling prey to other temptations within the tavern's walls. The tavern haunter became a common stereotype, a figure of moral degradation. Gambling, as we explored in Part 7, was rampant in taverns and was consistently condemned by the Church. It was seen as a form of idleness, covetousness, and a reliance on chance rather than divine providence or honest labor. Clerics and moralists wrote extensively against dice and card games, often associating them with cheating, swearing, and the violent outbursts they frequently provoked. To the Church, the tavern served as a prime locale where parishioners strayed from righteous paths through the allure of a quick, unearned gain. The presence of prostitution, touched upon in Part 11, was another major point of contention. While prostitution existed in medieval towns and was sometimes even tolerated or semi-regulated by secular authorities, as a necessary evil to prevent worse sins, its open association with taverns was a significant source of moral outcry. Taverns were often explicitly labeled as stews, or brothels, in moralistic literature, and women who frequented them were often lumped into a single category of loose or disreputable, individuals, regardless of their actual profession. For the Church, the tavern facilitated carnal sin and moral degradation. Beyond specific vices, the Church also viewed the tavern as a space that fostered idleness and neglect of duty. Instead of attending church, working in the fields, or caring for their families, men, and sometimes women, were seen to be squandering their time and resources in drunken revelry. This perception fed into broader anxieties about social order and the proper functioning of medieval society. A pious, hard-working populace was the ideal. The tavern threatened to undermine that ideal by promoting laziness and irresponsible behavior. However, despite this strong moral condemnation, the Church rarely advocated for the complete abolition of taverns. This pragmatic approach stemmed from several factors. Firstly, ale and wine were vital sources of calories and a safer alternative to water. They were necessities, not just luxuries. Secondly, taverns served indispensable social and economic functions, providing community gathering places, news hubs, and lodging for travelers. Completely shutting them down would have caused immense social disruption. Instead, the Church and secular authorities often worked together to regulate taverns, as seen in Part 12, rather than eliminate them. This involved issuing moral injunctions, setting curfews, attempting to control gambling, and punishing public drunkenness or blasphemy. Sometimes, specific types of people were forbidden from taverns during certain hours, such as apprentices or clergy during Mass. Monasteries themselves often brewed and sold ale, and some monastic establishments even operated inns or guesthouses, blurring the lines between spiritual and secular roles and highlighting the economic reality of the brewing trade. Furthermore, it's worth noting that even within the clergy, there was a diverse range of opinions and behaviors. While some preached vehemently against tavern vices, others, particularly friars and lower clergy, were known to frequent taverns themselves, blending in with the common folk. This often led to accusations of hypocrisy from reformers, but it also reflects the pervasive nature of tavern culture and the difficulty of maintaining strict moral boundaries in everyday life. In essence, the medieval tavern was caught in a fascinating moral paradox. It was an essential social and economic artery of medieval life, fulfilling basic human needs for sustenance, community, and leisure. Yet, it was simultaneously lambasted by the powerful moral authority of the Church as a hotbed of vice and a pathway to sin. This enduring tension shaped both the reality of tavern life and its representation in medieval culture, making it a place of both necessary function and profound moral debate. Its very existence challenged the strictures of medieval piety, offering a glimpse into the resilient, often contradictory, and deeply human spirit of the age. While historical texts and artistic depictions offer valuable glimpses into the medieval tavern, they often reflect the biases of their authors or the moralizing spirit of their time. To truly ground our understanding in reality, we must turn to the hard evidence buried beneath centuries of accumulated earth. Archaeological findings. The meticulous excavation of medieval urban sites and rural homesteads has unearthed a treasure trove of artifacts and structural remains that breathe tangible life into the stories we've been telling, offering silent but powerful testimony to the daily existence within these vibrant institutions. One of the most common and telling archaeological finds associated with medieval taverns are vast quantities of pottery and ceramic fragments. These aren't just shards. They are pieces of drinking vessels, mugs, tankards, and pitchers, indicating the sheer volume of ale and wine consumed. The types of pottery can tell us about the tavern's clientele and status: coarser, utilitarian earthenware for common establishments, and finer, sometimes imported, wares for more upscale inns. The sheer number of broken pieces often found in concentrated deposits suggests frequent breakage and replacement, a testament to the lively, often chaotic, atmosphere. Discoveries of jugs, bowls, and plates also confirm the serving of food, correlating with our understanding of pottage and roasted meats. Alongside drinking vessels, archaeologists frequently uncover remnants of glassware. While glass was more expensive than pottery, its presence, even in fragments, indicates a certain level of prosperity or a specific type of drink, like wine, which was often served in glass. The shapes of these glass pieces can provide clues about drinking customs and the evolution of vessels over time. Perhaps even more revealing are the vast quantities of animal bones. Faunal remains excavated from tavern sites provide direct evidence of the types of meat consumed. Researchers can identify bones from cattle, sheep, pigs, chickens, and even wild game. The cuts of meat found can indicate the tavern's clientele: cheaper, tougher cuts for commoners, and more prized joints for wealthier patrons. The presence of gnaw marks or butchery patterns also tells us about food preparation methods and how scraps were disposed of, often simply tossed onto the floor or into a nearby midden pit, which further supports our understanding of medieval sanitation, or lack thereof. The sheer volume of bones underscores the tavern's role as a primary source of hot, ready-to-eat food. Structural remains, though often fragmentary, also offer crucial insights. The foundations of buildings, remnants of hearths and ovens, and evidence of cellars for storing barrels of ale or wine allow archaeologists to reconstruct the layout of medieval taverns. We can discern the common room's size, the location of the kitchen area, and sometimes even the presence of separate sleeping quarters or stables. Evidence of drainage systems, or the lack thereof, provides further confirmation of sanitary practices. The discovery of multiple hearths or larger cooking areas would suggest a tavern that offered more extensive hot meals, while a simpler setup would point to an alehouse primarily serving drink and cold provisions. Beyond the mundane, more intriguing artifacts emerge. Gaming pieces, dice, often loaded, counters for board games, and even early playing card fragments are frequent finds, solidifying the literary and historical accounts of gambling as a ubiquitous tavern pastime. These small objects offer a direct link to the entertainment and risks that permeated these establishments. Coins are also common, often found lost or discarded, providing direct evidence of economic transactions and sometimes even insights into the currency circulating at the time. Archaeologists might also uncover evidence of crafts and trades conducted within or near taverns. For example, discarded tools, remnants of raw materials, or workshop spaces might indicate that a tavern keeper also engaged in another profession, or that a tavern was closely integrated with local craft activities. The presence of smithies or small workshops nearby further confirms the multifunctional nature of medieval urban centers and the tavern's central role within them. The study of environmental archaeology at tavern sites can also provide fascinating details. Analysis of pollen, seeds, and soil samples can reveal information about the types of grains used for brewing, the spices used in food, and even the general environmental conditions of the surrounding area. This helps to paint a more complete picture of the resources available, and the agricultural backdrop to tavern life. In essence, archaeological excavations serve as a crucial corrective and complement to written records. While texts tell us what people thought and wrote about taverns, the material culture literally unearths how they lived within them. From the broken pottery to the discarded bones, every artifact tells a silent story, allowing us to reconstruct the sights, sounds, and smells of these dynamic institutions, and to walk, however briefly, in the footsteps of their medieval patrons. These tangible remnants are invaluable for truly understanding the rich, complex, and often gritty reality of the medieval tavern. Behind the counter, beneath the smoky ceiling, and often amidst the boisterous chaos, stood the tavern keeper, a pivotal, often unsung, figure in medieval society. Whether a robust man or a shrewd alewife, these individuals were much more than simple barkeeps. They were entrepreneurs, hosts, arbiters of disputes, unofficial bankers, and sometimes even the local news source, all rolled into one demanding profession. Their daily lives were a constant juggle of commercial acumen, social management, and sheer physical endurance. The life of a medieval tavern keeper began early and ended late. Their day would often start before dawn, preparing for the influx of patrons. This might involve rekindling the hearth fire, fetching fresh water, ensuring the ale barrels were ready, and perhaps baking bread or stirring the pottage for the day's first meals. In larger establishments, they might oversee a small staff of servants or family members who helped with brewing, cooking, serving, and cleaning, however rudimentary that cleaning might be. The ability to manage these domestic and commercial tasks simultaneously was crucial. One of the primary responsibilities was the brewing of ale, or the procuring of wine. For many tavern keepers, especially alewives, brewing was an integral part of their business. This was a labor-intensive process, involving malting barley, boiling the wort, fermenting it, and then storing the finished product. The quality of their brew was paramount to their reputation and livelihood. A consistent, good-tasting ale ensured repeat customers, while a sour or watered-down batch could quickly drive patrons to a competitor. Keeping a steady supply was also challenging, as brewing was subject to seasonal variations and the availability of grain. Managing stock and finances was another constant concern. Tavern keepers had to buy ingredients, pay any licensing fees or taxes, as discussed in Part 12, and manage their profits. They often extended credit to local regulars, running tabs that required careful tracking, essentially acting as informal lenders within the community. This balancing act required sharp wits and a good head for numbers, as cash flow could be unpredictable. They had to be savvy traders, knowing where to get the best grain, meat, or wine at a reasonable price, and how to price their own wares competitively yet profitably. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of a tavern keeper's life was managing their diverse clientele. From noblemen to peasants, from sober merchants to drunken soldiers, the tavern keeper interacted with everyone. They needed to possess excellent social skills, affability to welcome new customers, patience to deal with complaints, and a firm hand to address unruly behavior. As we know from Part 4, brawls were common, and the tavern keeper was often the first line of defense. They had to be ready to step in, mediate disputes, or even physically eject troublemakers, often at personal risk. Their reputation as someone who could maintain order, even in the midst of chaos, was vital. A tavern that was constantly descending into unchecked violence would quickly lose its more desirable clientele. The tavern keeper also acted as a vital information broker and community hub. They heard all the gossip, all the news, and all the rumors circulating through the town and from passing travelers. They knew who was sick, who was getting married, who had been arrested, and who had come into money. This made them indispensable sources of local intelligence, often relied upon by others for information, or simply for a sympathetic ear. For travelers, the tavern keeper was often their first point of contact in a new place, providing guidance on local customs, directions, and potential dangers. For those taverns offering lodging, the responsibilities extended to managing sleeping arrangements, ensuring the security of guests' belongings, to the best of their ability, and maintaining stables for horses. This meant working even longer hours, often on call throughout the night for late arrivals or emergencies. The challenges faced by tavern keepers were numerous. Beyond the constant threat of unruly patrons and financial instability, they faced external pressures. Competition from other taverns could be fierce. They were vulnerable to theft, both from their own patrons and from external criminals. They had to contend with fluctuating prices for goods, harsh weather impacting trade, and the constant threat of disease outbreaks affecting their staff and clientele. Furthermore, they had to navigate the complex web of regulations imposed by local authorities and the moral scrutiny of the church. A good tavern keeper needed to walk a fine line, providing a lively atmosphere without provoking too much official condemnation. Despite these immense challenges, the role of a tavern keeper was often one of significant social standing within the community. They were often respected figures, proprietors of an essential service, and central to the economic and social life of their town or village. Their ability to successfully run such a multifaceted enterprise speaks volumes about their resilience, their business acumen, and their profound understanding of human nature. The medieval tavern, in all its chaotic glory, was truly a reflection of the dedicated individuals who tirelessly worked to keep its fires burning and its ale flowing. Beyond their social and cultural functions, medieval taverns were indispensable engines of the local economy, intricate nodes in the medieval commercial web. Their economic impact rippled far beyond the immediate transaction of a tankard of ale, generating revenue, supporting various trades, and facilitating the flow of goods and money in an era of nascent economic structures. Understanding their financial role is crucial to grasping their enduring presence and importance. The most direct economic contribution of a tavern was, of course, the sale of goods and services. Every pint of ale, every portion of pottage, every night's lodging, and every handful of oats for a traveler's horse generated revenue for the tavern keeper. This cash flow, though often in small denominations, was the lifeblood of the business, allowing the keeper to support their family, pay their staff, if any, and maintain their premises. In an economy where ready cash could be scarce, the tavern was a place where money constantly changed hands, keeping it in circulation. Beyond their own direct sales, taverns were significant consumers of local produce and goods. Brewers and tavern keepers purchased vast quantities of grain, barley, oats, rye, from local farmers to make their ale. This provided a consistent market for agricultural surplus, directly benefiting the rural economy. They also bought meat from local butchers, cheese from dairies, bread from bakers, and vegetables from market gardeners. Wood for the hearths and barrels for storage were sourced from coopers and foresters. This created a strong symbiotic relationship between the tavern and various other local trades, stimulating production and providing livelihoods for many within the community. Taverns also generated revenue for local authorities. Licenses were typically required to operate a tavern, and these came with associated fees or taxes. Authorities also collected revenue through duties on ale and wine sales, or through fines levied for infractions of quality control or public order. For many medieval towns and feudal lords, these direct and indirect revenues from taverns constituted a significant portion of their treasury, contributing to the upkeep of public infrastructure, the maintenance of law enforcement, or the financing of other civic endeavors. This economic dependence often meant that authorities, despite their moral reservations, had a vested interest in the continued operation of taverns. Furthermore, taverns played a crucial role in facilitating trade and commerce. For traveling merchants, taverns were indispensable. They offered safe lodging, a place to stable animals, and crucial opportunities for networking. Merchants could meet potential buyers or sellers, negotiate deals, and exchange information about market conditions. The tavern, in essence, functioned as an informal stock exchange or trading floor, where goods might be displayed, samples exchanged, and prices agreed upon, all over a shared meal and a few drinks. This made taverns key logistical points in regional and interregional trade networks. The presence of taverns also indirectly supported other service industries. Teamsters and carters who transported goods and people would often use taverns as their base, resting and watering their horses before continuing their journeys. Local craftsmen, such as smiths or wheelwrights, might find additional business repairing wagons or tools for travelers stopping at a tavern. The circulation of people, money, and goods through taverns had a positive multiplier effect on the wider economy. Moreover, taverns could be seen as employers of labor. While many were family-run, larger establishments would hire staff, brewers, serving wenches, stable boys, cooks, and even bouncers. This provided direct employment opportunities, particularly in urban areas, contributing to the local labor market and supporting families. In some cases, taverns might also function as informal banking or credit institutions. Regular patrons might run a tab, with the tavern keeper settling their accounts periodically. This provided a crucial, albeit informal, form of credit within the community, especially when official banking services were scarce or non-existent for the common folk. This mutual trust often formed the bedrock of local economic interactions. In conclusion, the medieval tavern was far more than just a place for leisure. It was a dynamic and indispensable component of the medieval economy. It generated revenue, stimulated local production, facilitated trade, provided employment, and served as a vital node for the circulation of money and information. Its financial utility was a compelling reason for its ubiquitous presence, and its continued operation, often outweighing the moral reservations of the church and authorities. The tavern, in its buzzing, smoky interior, truly reflected the economic pulse of its time, a vital hub where medieval society conducted its business and sustained its daily life. As our long journey through the smoky, boisterous, and often squalid world of the medieval tavern draws to a close, it's time to reflect on its enduring legacy. We've explored its physical reality, its vibrant social dynamics, its dark undercurrents, and its multifaceted role within medieval society. What becomes clear is that the medieval tavern was far more than just a place to drink. It was an indispensable institution, a mirror reflecting the very essence of medieval life, and a surprisingly direct ancestor of the modern public house. From the moment we first stepped into its dimly lit common room, we encountered a sensory overload. The smells of stale ale and wood smoke, the cacophony of voices, the rough-hewn furniture, and the undeniable sense of communal intimacy. This initial impression set the stage for understanding its core function as a vital gathering place. It was here that society, in all its messy complexity, truly came alive. Its doors welcomed almost everyone, from the humble peasant to the passing merchant, and even, on rare and clandestine occasions, royalty themselves. This democratic spirit, however fleeting, provided a unique social leveling not found in other medieval institutions. Yet, this broad appeal also came with challenges, particularly in terms of hygiene, which was by modern standards appalling, a constant reminder of the era's limitations in cleanliness and public health. This led, inevitably, to the frequent eruption of brawls and violence, fueled by alcohol, close quarters, and the ever-present tensions of medieval life, making the tavern a place of both conviviality and potential peril. Our exploration of its offerings went beyond just drinks. We delved into the simple, hearty food, the pottage, bread, and roasted meats that sustained its patrons, and understood that ale was not just a drink but a vital caloric staple. Crucially, the tavern was the undisputed central hub for news and communication, a place where information traveled by word of mouth, shaping collective understanding in an age without mass media. The entertainment it offered was raw and engaging. Gambling, particularly dice games, provided thrills and often led to disputes, while music and storytelling offered more wholesome, yet equally vibrant, forms of diversion, bringing communities together through shared song and narrative. For those on the move, the tavern served as an essential lodging and staging post, providing much-needed respite, sustenance, and information for weary travelers. However, we also confronted its darker side. The tavern was a magnet for petty crime, illicit dealings, and the less savory elements of society, where anonymity and indulgence could breed mischief. We also examined the complex role of women within these spaces, as owners, workers, and patrons, navigating societal judgments and contributing significantly to the tavern's operation despite the precariousness of their position. The authorities were not absent. Taverns were rigorously regulated through licensing, quality control, and attempts to manage behavior, reflecting a constant tension between their social utility and their potential for disorder. We contrasted the tavern with other medieval social institutions like the church, market, and guild halls, highlighting its unique blend of public access, leisure, and informal interaction. Its image in literature and art further revealed this duality, often portraying taverns as places of both vital community and moral decay. We also noted the fascinating diversity of these establishments, from humble rural alehouses to bustling urban inns and specialized merchant taverns. Furthermore, we explored the conflicted moral and religious views that condemned the tavern's vices while acknowledging its practical necessity, and grounded our understanding in the tangible archaeological evidence that brings its physical realities to life. We also paid tribute to the tavern owners, the resilient individuals who managed these complex businesses, balancing hospitality with the need for order and profitability. And we concluded by highlighting the significant economic contribution taverns made, acting as hubs for trade, consumers of local produce, and generators of revenue for authorities. So, what is the lasting legacy of the medieval tavern? It is profound. The fundamental human needs that medieval taverns fulfilled, for community, relaxation, nourishment, information, and entertainment, are timeless. While modern pubs, bars, and restaurants boast vastly improved hygiene, sophisticated menus, and more refined entertainment, the core impulse remains the same. The friendly local pub, the bustling city bar, the quiet village inn, all carry the echoes of their medieval ancestors. The shared laughter, the clinking of glasses, the exchange of stories, the fleeting connections with strangers, and the sense of belonging are threads that stretch unbroken from the smoky common rooms of the Middle Ages to the vibrant establishments of today. The medieval tavern was a microcosm of its world, complex, chaotic, essential, and deeply human. It was a place where life, in all its messy, vibrant glory, truly happened. And in understanding its past, we gain a deeper appreciation for the enduring human desire for a place to gather, to unwind, and to simply be together. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through time. I hope you've enjoyed our deep dive into the heart of the medieval world.